Hello, welcome to the Executive Insights podcast, where we're talking with fractional executives and advisory leaders, helping businesses scale, raise capital, and exit with confidence. I'm your host, Dallion Broomfield, and today I'm joined with Andrew Stubbs, who is the Director of CFO Services at Visibility CFO and Deal Advisors. Visibility's tagline is clarity that closes, helping founders build decision grade financials that protect their exit. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Welcome. It's good to be here. Thanks for having
Yeah,
me.
Andrew, what's one thing founders consistently overestimate when they think about selling their business someday?
Ooh, there's a couple things that come to mind. I would say one of the first is, their involvement in the business typically has a bigger impact on its value than they realize. Almost every sim that I see come across that we look at, and has some sort of a description that, it's owner, non-owner operated. We are involved minimal time, or we don't, invoice or bill our time. But when you kind of pull the covers back, you realize that there's quite a bit of involvement. That the business does really rely on the owner and the owner's expertise and background, and that can have an impact on enterprise value, on the value of the business and the eventual sales price, more than they realize. The other key piece that is important is, a lot of companies want to use their operational financial statements that they use on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to be what supports the value of a business. The problem with that is those financial statements aren't always curated to help a buyer be confident, to be comfortable and really essentially have trust in that being what they're going to be buying. So, for example, many of you listeners might understand, there's a lot of adjustments to the P&L, a lot of expenses, depending on the focus of the financials. You might even have, we call them personal but business deductible expenses that are wrapped into the operations of a business that should be extracted and, placed on other entities, but they leave them in there. They might be tax focused as opposed to accrual or gap focused. And what the difference there typically looks like is, trying to maximize deductions for the purpose of paying or minimizing tax, as opposed to really showing what is the true margin in a given period. Are we aligning the revenue to the costs, and helping an external user or an outsider see what are the true margins, not only overall for the company, but by service line, by product, by region, by whatever segment they're looking at. When a buyer can see that, and they can see how that would translate or transition over to them in their business, that's going to give them a ton of confidence and comfort. And when that occurs, they're going to be less apt to beat down and negotiate the value. And whatever the LOI is essentially submitted for, it typically stays pretty close when they take great care to curate their financials for a deal, as opposed to not approaching that very seriously, or just thinking to themselves, "Hey, I've got financial reports. I can share those." But there's a process there between what they're doing on a day-to-day basis within their business and what's supporting their decisions, and what they're going to need to provide a potential buyer to help them really see into the business for what it is, and feel less risk, feel less apprehension and concern around, are they really telling me the truth when I ask for backup? It's taken them a long time to pull it together. So that feels to me as a buyer that they're doing it right then and there, as opposed to not always having that ready to go. And so when a buyer asks, in due diligence, "Hey, how do we support, a roster of clients and what you've received from them or customers," or whatever the case might be, you're able to put that out there pretty quickly within 24 hours. And so making sure to engage, either your employees currently that you have, or outside help to make sure that you're ready in those scenarios, is something that gets overlooked quite a bit when a buyer or when a seller is thinking about putting their business up for sale.
Yeah, and so there's different financials that you would show. Like, let's say I'm going to show specific financials if I'm going to be filing my taxes, but if I'm going to be selling my business, there's different financials that I'm going to need to be able to
Absolutely.
provide to make that buyer feel comfortable, and around those numbers. Is that what you would
Absolutely.
say? Yeah,
Yeah, no, that's exactly what, yeah, the point I'm trying to get at.
yeah. So you've spent 15 years across VC, early growth, the PE funded businesses, plus time at Alvarez and Marsal. I hope I said that right. And there was also Ernest and Young. What do you think those environments taught you about what good looks like financially?
Yeah, all of them had their place and provided a lot of value. My background is unique. I would say a lot of professionals that get the degree that I got, which is essentially a master's in accounting. I also have an MBA in finance. They typically stay on a track or a very closely related track, whereas I was trying to find my place early on in my career that combined what I liked about the traditional accounting routes crossed or overlapped more with strategy and supporting and enhancing the decision making of executives. I would always kind of be told early on when I was in more of the traditional routes related to audit and tax that was a focus. But when I saw that unfold in real life in the day to day, it didn't quite feel that way, and I wasn't being treated that way by clients, and so it was more of a necessary evil service. But there was but those areas, those stops in my career were very, very helpful and have helped me become more well-rounded as a CFO. Let me just give a few examples of how that worked out. So early on in my career, I did spend time at Ernst and Young as an auditor. I was only there for a few years, 3.5 years, and then I did spend about 5 years as a tax associate. Really just getting deep on not just tax prep, but also tax planning, being strategic with minimizing tax, ethically, and those two combined really require a little bit of an art and skill. So it was really great exposure. From there is when I started moving into advisory, which is about this is 2026, so it was about 15 years ago. And so as I moved into that space, back then it was called accounting advisory. It was essentially a controller advisor. It was everything looking back. So it was essentially being on the other side of the table. I was liaisoning with my clients internally as an internal role, but as a consultant. And I was liaisoning with their external, CPA and other accounting providers. So their tax person, or if they needed an audit, I was helping them go through that, but from the other side of the table. As I saw that unfold, my eyes started to open on, oh wow, now I see why I was treated this way, because we have to check this box for compliance reasons, but this isn't really helping us grow other than it's just opening doors for us and making sure we don't get in trouble as a business. But where the real strategy came into piece was, making sure, like you had just said earlier, do we have all the different sets of books from the different lenses and angles to look at our business in a way that's going to help strengthen cash flow, that's going to help them make better decisions for growth, to give them a CEO and a visionary the confidence to make those decisions, where all they got to be focused on is revenue and engaging customers or clients or patients or whatever the case might be. When they can focus on that, and my role is to help them see how the investment dollars, the capital, would go to work to support that growth, then they get really excited. And that interaction or that interplay between the role of a CFO or a senior controller or finance, VP of finance, that role and interacting with the owners is really what got me excited, and it's really what's helped me bring in this knowledge of tax planning, this knowledge of financial statement prep from a compliance lens, but also from a strategic lens, uh, which doesn't typically get put out there, right? The strategic lens of a financial statement, which typically isn't just your balance sheet and P&L, but you're looking at segmented P&Ls, you're looking at cash forecasts, you're looking at just in more internal planning documents or planning reports that help establish that future and what it could look like. That was the side that I didn't get, that was additive and that was helpful as I moved into an internal advisor role. But it was definitely where I've spent the majority of my career now, just because I've been able to take those historical parts of my career and exposures and experience to enhance my role as a CFO advisor today. So a lot of what I do today and what I train my team on is centered around those very key and important pieces of service, right, around tax compliance, tax planning, and audit. And I'll just say financial statement compliance. Using that to sort of broaden my view to be a CFO. Along that road and that journey, I had some important. I went and got more education. I had a mentor that said, "Hey, very similar background to me. Said you are really good and have a good skill set in accounting. As a CPA, that's typically where your skill set lies. You understand financial statements, you understand backward-looking reporting." But to be a good and effective CFO, you've got to be able to help your clients plan for the future, right? In the form of projections, modeling, budgets, everything that sort of helps tell the story financially towards the future as decisions are being made. You need to develop that skill. And so, through him, was able to go back, get an MBA in finance, and really broaden my skill set there. So
Yeah. What would you say like the main pillars are for these lenses you got to look at, right? Like, so you're looking at different lens if you're going to be doing some tax planning. You're looking at a different lens if you want to raise capital. What would you say like the five or six major pillars of those lenses that you're looking at with an average business?
yeah, we typically bucket our areas of focus into what's operational, what's financial, right? So within the bucket of financial, our core one of our core services is setting up a process to close the financials or close the books through the lens of accrual gap, cash basis, and then tax basis. The reason for that, accrual gap is the value there. There's a compliance value, right? Like if you need to get a bank loan or you need to portray yourself in a way that shows how you're meeting covenants, or whatever the case might be for external users, there is that box that it's checking. But where it becomes operational and important for business owners or visionaries to understand is accrual aligns the timing of when the revenue occurs, not when it's collected, but when it occurs, to when the expenses are incurred, not when you're paying it out. And that education obviously starts, in my during my days as an auditor, getting my education in accounting. But I think being able to you know underscore or showcase the value of that lens is very important, because when you understand your business in that light, truly how it's performing. Now, cash is king, and you've got to understand, metrics like cash conversion cycle and how efficient you are with your receivables, with your payables. If you have inventory, how fast is that turning over? So you need to understand your profitability from a cash flow perspective, and not only looking back on how things are looking, but having a forecast. My days at Alvarez and Marsal were really good around instructing me to build 13-week cash forecast. Alvarez Marsal is a restructuring, bankruptcy and restructuring focused service, or at least traditionally that's what they've been focused on. So they have really great training around that and a lot of exposures to repetition in doing that. And so again, using that experience and skill set to build those for our current clients has proved invaluable. It's one of the first things, I would say, low-hanging fruit services that we put in place with our clients and help them see this 13-week view of how capital is going to be used. And it's essentially a sources and uses. And because cash flow for a lot of business owners, even big ones, right, even for large companies, especially ones that are raising capital, haven't produced profit yet, cash flow is key, and looking at it from all perspectives. The traditional cash flow statement is good and important, but making sure that translates over the forecast of 13 weeks, which is essentially 3 months, is great for liquidity planning. And then the last, clearly, that we don't want to overlook is your tax basis financials. So it is a balance sheet and P&L, but it's prepared on a tax basis. And what we're essentially doing there, right, is converting it to a cash basis, but then implementing the tax focused provisions that will get that will essentially make their way into a tax software, into a tax return. And so what that allows a business owner to know is, hey, if we have this operating plan, we're making these decisions, we're reinvesting in our company for growth, or whatever the case might be. Um, how do I know if I'm taking advantage of the tax laws and making sure I'm minimizing my tax, making sure that for my partners who are silent, that when they're going to get, this benefit that will help them offset income in other areas of their lives. And so, having that there and available. And the other thing that's also very important is businesses sometimes take too much money out of their business. As owners, they're taking dividends and draws. They might overdraw on their basis. They might take too much, which would trigger capital gain. Or they just might not have enough money to pay their tax later on. So having money for the partners to be able to, forecast what that tax liability would look like, so that there's cash available to help the partners pay for it, is very, very important. And so we make sure, and that, the two are kind of dovetailed, the cash basis lens and the tax basis, because, what one shows, the other needs to support it in available capital to be able to, you know, have the different scenarios to play with and the different options to choose from.
Yeah, yeah, that's brilliant. You said something on, I believe it was a LinkedIn post. You said most exit mistakes don't happen at the sale, they happen years earlier, which is, absolutely, I could agree with that. So, what do you think the most common years earlier mistake is made?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say, I always like to use this metaphor when you, and it goes deeper than this, but this gives us at least a broad level, understanding. If you think about, the homes that we live in and how we treat them when we're feeling like we're going to be in this for the long haul, we let things get out of hand, right? We let, you know, dents in the wall, or, cracked window, or whatever, that we let our homes essentially be worn down. The moment, right, and it might be 20 years that we're living in it, we let things accumulate and whatever. The moment we're ready to sell, what do? We make that house look beautiful, right? We pull the weed, we do the landscaping, we're repainting, we're doing, right, fixing all the little things that have been bothering us, so that it can be shown to the world, to the pool of buyers that are out there. This is a beautiful home. It's going to make sense. You're going to see yourself living here, and I'm going to get top dollar as a seller. What's unfortunate about that in the scenario of a business is, business owners do the same thing when they're ready to sell, or when they're getting to the end of their careers, and that business is, supported lifestyle, and it's been good for them. But what they don't understand, or they don't realize, is had they treated their business like they were getting it ready for sale, and using a lot of the same metrics that are used by a buyer in valuing that company, using that as part of their decision making, rubric, early on, they're gonna realize that their business could have been a lot more valuable, as they, tried to create and set goals that were associated with, EBITDA, that were associated with Keyman Risk, right? We can go down the list of all these factors that go into valuation, and as they're looking at that and letting that be at least one of the drivers for how they make decisions and how they try to, and maybe they're not growing, but they're looking to at least establish a system and a process and do things that, helps them. Eventually, it's going to help them sell for a top dollar or a higher dollar. If they do that earlier on, they're going to catch a lot of the mistakes. Now, there's a lot of different really good examples that exist on both the CFO related sides. Your operations, what are your reporting packages? What are you tracking? What are you measuring? What are you optimizing for in your business? And do you have eyes and insight into all of those key factors? And then there's also, the legal side, which my wife, oversees, and is very involved, and her team is very involved in making sure they're not exposures or onerous exposures to risk, which in a lot of companies there are, and business owners just learn to be okay with that, which is fine. But as you're getting ready to sell, a lot of a lot of due diligence is centered around those key exposures to, or excuse me, those exposures to risk. And so, factoring or baking those, uh, you know, baking those factors into, how you're trying to increase and improve the value is very important, not waiting till the time of sale. Because
Yeah.
when you're about to sell, what we found typically happens, it's really really easy to take your eye off the ball when you know that in your mind you may not be owning this company a year from now, right? Depending
Mhm.
on when you're really trying to get your business ready for sale. But if you're like, hey, I'm ready to sell, and then your expectation is to list next month, and you think that all you need to do is get a sim, your focus is gonna start turning there. And then what happens to your business is that it's either gonna go on autopilot at best, but a lot of times it starts taking a little bit of a hit without realizing it. And then there's this churn that happens sometimes where they're like, oh, I can't sell now because my business isn't supporting what I thought it was and what I wanted to support to get the valuation I'm seeking. And so then they delist, they go back to build it back up, and then they let right, making sure that infrastructure is there at a high level. Essentially, like to go back to that metaphor, treating your house like it's ready to sell or list always, so you can enjoy it in that you know uh, beefed up state, that
Yeah.
that nice state, as opposed to the way we let our homes or our businesses kind of go to
Yeah.
without
I
that
like that
focus.
analogy because it's also like, hey, I'm going to be selling in a month, so I may not look at this problem over here, or,
Yeah,
just don't change the whole thing out. Just replace this little part and just keep it running for another
yeah,
month. Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
How long do
Uh,
you think, like on average, when you take on a new client and they're nowhere close to being ready to sell, like their books are a mess, they're basically a mess. But how long would you say it takes to get them ready to sell, ideally?
yeah, ideally, so you want 2 to 3 years. So here, I'll speak from the perspective of a CFO, right? And so what I know buyers, what they're going to want to see, right? They're not going to just want to see, a QuickBooks, direct from QuickBooks spit out balance sheet and P&L. If they get that, they're going to have a lot of questions, and they're gonna not only they're going to have a lot of questions, and the answers that they get initially, unless they're supported by backup and detail, they're gonna question the question or the answer from their questions, essentially. From a time frame perspective, I would say, so we have a couple of different tiers of services. When we get involved with our clients, we call it a 90-day sprint. When you're doing that, we typically apply that to scenarios where there is some sort of an emergency or some sort of just bad situation. Someone dies who was a key man, and so we need to sell quickly to support the benefactors. Or somebody, there's we call it partnership dissension, illness, yeah, whatever the case might be. So
Yeah.
90-day sprint is where we do that, but it's not the ideal scenario. What I like is a minimum of at least 9 months. With 9 months, what we can do is put together a package that grabs at least 2 to 3 years of financials, and not just financials that are coming out of your QuickBooks, but we're able to really look at revenue, segment it, see it for what it is. We know that it's supported by deposits in the bank account. We're looking at our direct costs, making sure that they're associated in the right time periods, that we're showing the right margins, that we're able to go month to month. We're not just, doing all these crazy entries at the end of a year. So we want to make sure that our financials presented in a way that looks clean, looks sophisticated, is going to instill confidence. There are formats and templates that follow that, and that to a team, a buyer these days, a lot of them, they're either financial sponsors or they're strategic buyers, and they have a team of CFOs, or even sometimes they engage people that come in, and they know what they're looking for, and they know if when they see a financial reporting package for due diligence in a data room, that's been uploaded, they know if this is something they can beat up, or if this is like, oh man, these guys are organized. They're ready. All we need to do is look and make sure that this really pretty financial statement is legitimate. So they'll turn their focus to just supporting and backing and backup detail that they'll want to be able to review. But just like anything else, right? When you're in an environment that you initially trust, right? First impressions are huge. Then your questions will typically be trusted. Your answers to your questions will typically be trusted with a lot more confidence than if you just see a mess, right? And so 9 months is where I like to get them. If I have 2 to 3 years, then not only do I believe we can sustain value, but we can improve value. And what's good about what we do when we are showing, potential business owner that wants to sell in whatever time frame, our services are natural, normalized add backs for a P&L. So a lot of times people think, oh, I'm going to take this hit on my P&L. Like, no, this is a normalized add back because all we're doing is getting your business essentially, like, in the metaphor, we're getting it ready to sell. Now, if we have to do it quick in the 90 days, we're going to do our best, essentially putting lipstick on a pig. We have 9 months. I know we can get at least what you're thinking your value is, or we'll bring it back to reality if we need to. But we do an assessment, and we're at least going to defend this. If we have 2 to 3 years, then we are going to try to grab at least a 20% pop in that current valuation at the time we meet with them. And so it's hard to have a 2 to 3 year foresight, right, and think there's enough of a pain point that I need to get someone involved. But what comes down to it is, in terms of valuation and comparing that to the investment of getting our team involved, is that one, it doesn't affect your value. We're gonna support and defend that this is an add back because our focus was solely on getting a company ready for sale, and it is not aligned to what does it take, what are the costs that it takes to run this business. And so we're external to that. And so once an owner can see that, then they see the value of what we're trying to do there. And so, yeah, 2 to 3 years, 9 months, 90 days is kind of like my broad buckets. Of course, we have found clients in all sorts of time frames where discussions get mad. Sometimes they're not even ready to sell, and it's more of a focus of raising capital through debt, through the
Right.
debt markets. They want to get a loan, or they want to get a line of credit, or maybe they just want to sell slowly through partners. And so they're building their team that way, and so that looks a little bit different, but still involves a lot of the similar looks to an internal buyer. Management buyout agreement is what we call
But humans are emotional, so I would
it. Very.
assume that like the 90-day sprint thing is pretty common. Like when you have somebody come to you, they're like, "Hey, we're ready to go." Another thing that struck my curiosity because you said, these other bigger firms, well, they've got their own CFOs that come in and they know what they're looking for. So do you ever run into a situation like, because you're networking with these people, you know these people, you ever run into a situation where somebody comes to you, they're wanting to sell your business, and you're like, "I know somebody that can buy your business." Like, I know these people.
Yeah, we do. So we do network because one of our areas of, we're always trying to get to know people and understand, where their services are and how does it align and the value chain of what we're trying to do. But, there are pools of buyers out there, especially whether they're going to be sponsor buyers, right, private equity or venture capital, or they're going to be strategic, right? They're a large roll up and they focus only on this industry. What's been really hot these days are, the professional services business, right? The CPA firms, financial advisor
Well,
firms. Pest control is where I was going to go next. Like the home services business is huge,
yep.
right?
Yeah.
HVAC, plumbing, pest
Hmm.
control, window washing. Like you would think, right? What gets put out there a lot is boring businesses that cash flow. I mean, there's a lot of trainers, right? People out there, mentors that are putting businesses together to help people buy those kinds of businesses. And they're great. I actually really appreciate and love that they have that kind of a service. But those pools of buyers typically are being taught or instructed, to have a criteria. And so what we in our networking, we are given a buy box description, right, of what they're looking for, and it typically involves metrics. It typically involves some intangible factors that we're looking for when we're then okay, great, that's good to know. We're trying to find clients that can fit that description that we may currently be working with. But a lot of times, really, when we're working with buyers like that, they will find target companies, but through the experience of trying to get them under contract, right, submitting an LOI and doing due diligence, they realize this company isn't ready to sell. There's too much emotion imputed into the value. I need to be able to see more support. And they let the sellers know that, but then where the bridge happens between the gap is getting us involved. So that's where we love, when emotion is there, I don't discount when I'm talking to a seller that value isn't there per the emotion, but a lot of business owners aren't super educated and in the know of how to support that to a buyer, especially a sophisticated buyer that's going to be looking at all the right things. So being able to support that um, is where there's a lot of value in doing that. But a lot of times we discover those scenarios through our network of buyers,
Yeah.
and then they're pretty well educated because a lot of them, especially if they're niched in an industry, they know the metrics that are at least industry average and what they're looking for, and so they don't mind underperformers because they're typically really good at taking certain things in a business and turning them around because they're good at those areas. So some of it is just a matching of, hey, where are their weak spots, and if it fits these areas where we're strong, this is going to be a great acquisition for us.
Yeah.
But anyways, that's kind of how we get involved there.
Yeah. So what do you think the biggest deal killer or the most common deal killer is?
Yeah, it depends on the size of the deal. Emotions play, so the seller getting cold feet, um, you know, either because of internal situations, they see a lot of times they see that their business really isn't currently supporting the value they want. So they want to go back to the table or they want to go back to the operations and rebuild it back up so they can get what they want. That's been a contributor. If it's a smaller deal, um, buyers will only trust, third party, outside prepared financials. And so where that happens, because these smaller businesses aren't going to engage a CPA firm to provide a comfort letter around the financials. So these buyers will typically want to look at a tax return. Well, the problem with that, right, is they're typically geared towards minimizing tax, and so their profitability looks very different than the one they're showing them. So that's been an area where we've seen, then there being a gap in a negotiation to bring the price down, and so there have been tactics and ways to help buyers feel comfortable in those scenarios. But in the larger spaces, you're going to have buyers that are typically sophisticated. They're less emotional. They know what they're looking for, and so where the emotion shifts is typically to the seller. A seller, especially these days where you have these 20 plus year founder operator owners that have raised their families on this business. This business means more than just its operations and what it's putting out there into the world in terms of value. It represents
Yeah.
this great lifestyle, this kids going to college, whatever, right? Like, and so they get the emotion of that is really, it can be a detriment. Another one that I've seen, again, thinking off the top, trying to think quickly on my feet, but one that I've seen is, and we have a legal team right here at Visibility, but externally, attorneys are great. Without them, we'd have a lot more conflict in the world. But sometimes that value gets portrayed in the terms of calling out risks that are onerous, that are just part of a deal. When you buy a company, you know you're going to buy risk, right? And so, but we've seen some interactions, in the legal field where things are looking like they're moving along, and then the APAs, right, the asset purchase agreements, get thrown to the attorneys, and as they battle it out and they're trying to defend their clients' interests, the deal gets, the reviews expose areas of risk that inherently, yeah, they make sense. They're going to exist, but because either side's not willing to budge, or they're not willing to compromise, or they're not solution oriented, then everyone tends to, you go hard in your mind and your willingness to compromise if the other side isn't. And typically that's being driven by representation, by counselors that aren't solution oriented. And so we've seen deals essentially get held up, and they always say time kills all deals, right? And so if those due diligence periods keep getting extended and extended, and we think no one can come to a middle ground. Those sellers have to go back to thinking about their business and keeping it going and not being so focused on getting a deal through. And so that I've seen that's why I've seen the pattern, at least, of how I've seen deals unravel.
Yeah,
But yeah.
that's brilliant. So let's talk about visibility a little bit more in depth. What stage is visibility in right now, and what does growth look like for you guys over the next 12 months?
Yeah, 12 months, I would say. So in terms of personnel, we're a team of six. We're kind of divided across, and we have some contractors in addition to that help us during seasons of flux and given the tax
Just
world,
account
yeah,
stuff.
we're
Yeah.
always going to have a busy time this time of year. But I would say where we're a little different and how we're trying to grow with that model is in we're not a traditional tax firm. We do have a tax prep uh, service that we offer, but it's only under the umbrella of us being involved with you as a business for other reasons, the strategic reasons, the CFO related reasons. We provide the tax because it is part of the strategy of how cash is being used. And we want to make sure we're planning for all angles of the business. So both CFO tax and legal typically represent, a good oversight of how a business, needs to deploy capital, right? And so making sure that it's not at risk, making sure that it's minimizing tax, and just making sure that it's going to make money, right? There's going to be a profit there at the end of the day. And so as we're looking at companies in that manner, our tax service really centers around knowing all the ins and outs of a business and not having to wait and doing the back and forth dance with our clients, because we typically have what we need, by the end of January. And so that tax prep season is pretty smooth. Our growth there will be secondary to the growth of our main focus at Visibility with our small team is sophisticating companies to unlock growth. That's one of our areas of focus for the CFO. I would say a sub focus or an even dialed in, scoped out focus stemming from that is when a company is ready for a liquidity event. Either they want to sell to an internal partner or a key manager, key employee that's moving up. And they're essentially going to phase out over time. If they're looking to just carve out a portion of their business, or they're looking to sell the whole thing, or they're wanting to grow, and so we're on the buy side, doing that diligence. That's where we're trying to hone in our marketing and our efforts around the kinds of clients we want to be working with, because we have learned that we're really good at maximizing value in those scenarios. And so just like any company that's trying to grow and they're trying to set those big goals, they need to raise their floor. And what that really just means is putting their focus on what they're optimizing for as a service. There is a lot you can do in the legal field. There's a lot you can do in the tax field. There's a lot you can do in the CFO field. But if we think about the Venn diagram of all three of those and what we do best in all three of those, anything around the liquidity event, specifically helping a company be ready for sale and optimizing or maximizing their value and defending that value for buyers or for sellers to the buyers, that's where we've become good and where we're going to be, where we're centering our training for new professionals in those areas, where we're centering our marketing efforts, and what we're talking to professionals out there in the world. So a lot of our networking is with potential buyers, with business brokers, and people who are involved in that phase of a business's life, right? And so um, we're here located in Phoenix, Arizona. We'd love to grow our area of focus and our services to other cities within Arizona and even go cross state. We have licenses in other states here in the PAC Southwest area, and
Okay.
so growing into other areas. But we have a lot of concepts that we're testing out related to the deal, related to unlocking capital, right? And so we're testing those out, making sure as we do grow, we can scale both the fulfillment and the revenue side. The the service offering side of what we do.
Yeah. So your marketing strategies, which one would you say makes the most conversions for you? Is it, LinkedIn, referrals, cold email?
Yeah, um, that's a great question. I would say a lot of them is referrals, but we have learned to not just rely on that. That is a great, warm transition to a client because they're typically being referred by someone that they already trust, and so that works out to be really good. But it's not scalable. And so we have seen, doing podcasts like this, making sure we're talking about our involvement, where our value typically is, so that potential candidates or clients, they see what working with us would look like, how it would relieve pain, how it would be a trigger for what they're seeking to accomplish in their business. Those are it's an art, right? To make sure you're communicating clearly and well enough to create an emotion within a business owner or a potential client, so that they feel at least the need to, hey, I want to learn more about this. So any chance we can get, speaking at events, podcasts where we're able to talk about the business have been very valuable in that, and from that respect. And we do put content out there on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram. I think those are our three major channels. And they do produce eyeballs. It's hard to really kind of tie back, and maybe we're not large enough where I'm sure we could get the analytics on it, but it's hard sometimes to really tie back to sometimes when we meet somebody, they've heard about us from a couple of different areas, but there was the one event that finally made them reach out via an email or whatever, and so we
Right.
get to know them that way.
Kind of takes a while to build that trust in your
Exactly.
industry. Well, what do you
High
think?
trust
Yeah,
type service, because we're
right.
we're involved in a lot of very sensitive areas.
Yeah, yeah. So, are there any bottlenecks that you think you're experiencing right now when it comes to pipeline conversions or lead quality?
Um, and this might just be me, but I feel like the bottlenecks that I uh, see exist are on the fulfillment side. So training, finding the right phase of talent. So not straight out of school, but also not too seasoned. What we do is very unique, and it's the reason why we work and fit with the clients we do is because they're not currently doing what we offer, and so as a result of that, we're needing to train people who maybe not have been too set in their ways, doing it, being in house and doing it a certain way, because sometimes it's really hard to be trained, a different way, but also someone who's not just straight out of school and their knowledge is centered around the academic settings. It needs to have some real life and real world. So that's where I see a lot of bottlenecks. On the revenue side, it might be, we probably need to engage technology more. We probably need to understand how we can leverage and scale our exposure. Because I'm a little old school in that I like to, I'm happy to do something like this and it's going to get blasted to our network, right? And so it's recorded. They can see it as many times as they want, and the exposure of that, I'm trying and very open minded to it, but I'm trying to you know, I guess make a deeper connection with what technology can do to get your name out there and build your brand and instill that at least enough confidence where someone's going to be, triggered to take action and want to acquire further. So
Yeah.
there's a
So,
lot of tools out there that I know we're probably not utilizing and need to.
well, how do you balance working on your own business growth while still serving clients at a high level?
Yeah, our model, we purposefully, from a lot of the stuff that I said earlier, from what businesses need to do to be ready to sell, you know, my wife and I, who are the founders of this company, have taken deliberate action to not be too involved with our clients on a day-to-day basis. We are involved, especially in the early stages of bringing on a client, just because there's a lot of every business's challenges, which typically are need to get over to accomplish a very similar end, which is deal maximization, defricting the deal. that it's very dynamic. There's a lot of things that can go wrong or that they're dealing with and that we need to help them find solutions for. The moment we can stabilize a company, then we're trying to essentially align value to the services or the types of services rendered. So we're shifting that to others. As I've done that, I've opened up my day for these types of activities and being more involved in you know interacting with interacting with you know the markets and being able to get more exposure to our brand and what we're doing.
Yeah, sounds like you're building something really amazing here. Hypothetically, if you had a magic wand to fix one thing in the business right now, whether it's holding you back or slowing you down, what would that be?
Um, it would be in the training, leverage scaling the training of what we're doing, and developing a pipeline of identifying good talent at the right phase of career. And so, because I know what we do is a need in the market, but unless we're able to have the right kinds of professionals understanding where we're rendering value for our clients, without them understanding that's where our growth will be limited. And so the magic wand would be like, oh, all this knowledge that we have, making sure we're sophisticating that training, whether it's videos, whether it's, you know, detailed systems and processes, steps of how we approach something, getting that canonized essentially.
Yeah, so you don't have
So
that like standard operating procedures or stuff like that. That's stuff that you guys don't have in a place right now.
we do, but it's not in an area or at a level that I think it always needs to be refined.
Mm-hmm.
So we have what we started off doing, because every client is a little different. We started off filming how to perform some of the routine services, but every client being a little different, there's nuances that you got to think about. And so we were doing it by client essentially. We've created a repository and we've bucketed them into, okay, this is what you initially client onboarding. This is what that looks like. How you gather access to different backend softwares and documents. So anyways, we have that built out, but we've seen holes, right? And as we've onboarded new professionals, having to get step back in and making sure that we're keeping the confidence that the client needs in our services going. We learn all the time that, hey, we need to make sure this is implemented into our training, and so keeping that updated has become very difficult.
Yeah.
That's where I would love that magic wand. We
Yeah.
could just find the level of detail and scenarios that we need to make sure exists there. So
Yeah. Well, for founders listening who think they might sell someday, what's one thing that they can do this quarter that will raise enterprise value even if they never sell?
I would say the biggest thing is take a step back and look at their business as though they were trying to sell, and make sure that they're not keeping a blind eye to the areas of their business that they need to be measuring and tracking, so that whether they sell or not, they know that the metrics of value are being supported, by the right detail, the right reports, the right documentation. And I would say if they start filtering their decisions that they make in the business, the culture, how involved they are as an owner, if they start filtering that through that lens, they're going to start seeing a lift to the enterprise value, to the valuation of their businesses.
That's great. That's brilliant, Andrew. Thank you. So, for listeners out there who want to learn more about visibility and get in touch with you, how would they do that?
Yeah, our website is visibility, www.visibilitycpa.com. We're also on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, probably on some other social media channels and outlets that I may not be fully aware of, but those are the areas you'll find us. My email personally is at astubbs@visibilitycpa.com. So feel free to email me directly, and would love to set up a chat and just have a conversation. Zero pressure.
Yep, I did notice on the website there is a Calendly booking link, so that is probably the fastest way. If you guys want to get in touch with Aaron, go ahead and just book that 30-minute call with him. Andrew, this was awesome. Thanks for the clarity and making the sell tomorrow mindset practical for us.
Great. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Thanks, Dallion.
All right, Aaron, take care.